All right, guys. There is one person in history who will go down in my book as the worst teacher that I ever had. And you guys know that I love to focus on the positive aspects of people. I really think that everyone, despite their differences, has their best of intentions. But this one person, when I was in school, I don't want to say she traumatized me, but really frustrated me and my mother. So, the worst teacher that I had was my fifth grade science teacher. And of course, I am not going to name her by name, but let's give you a little bit of a backstory. My mother used to teach in the same elementary school that I attended. I was a straight A student, so naturally, some people sometimes thought or felt that I may be given a pass with good grades or something because my teachers are my mother's colleagues, and that is entirely not the case. My mother always made sure that I never ended up with a class with her as the teacher because I was a good student. I did my homework, I studied, and she taught the more advanced classes. So imagine if I would have been placed in her class and then I'm making perfect grades pretty much, and it wouldn't look right. So to avoid that, my mother made sure that I always was placed with different teachers. So on this particular year, I had a science class, of course, and it was in the evenings. And interestingly enough, this class, I remember it was only 45 minutes long. The fact that it was only 45 minutes long really stressed me out because I'm thinking science is quite a complex topic. There is just no way that one can really go over everything that's essential in such a short amount of time, and let alone have class participation, which is ask questions and elaborate on things. So, this teacher's teaching method was particularly frustrating. As a student, I personally was the kind who always took notes. If you provide a handout next to it, I am writing little notes based on what the teacher wants, what the teacher expects, specifications, so that if I'm going to turn in homework or study for a test, I know what to expect or how to expect it. Well, this teacher had a semester long project going on, and it was creating a portfolio, which is basically all of our science experiments and also some that are, um, what's the term? It slips me. I think the word starts with a C, but anyways, it means that you do not have to practically do an experiment. You use graphs and abstractly predict what the result is going to be. Dang, I forgot the term. The term would really sum up my thoughts on this one. But basically, it's as opposed to literally doing the experiment, say, let's say mixing a chemical or something, you, based on your notes, based on a chart, theoretically, that's the term. It didn't start with a C. It's like you put it into a theory type of deal, and then you express your result. Well, as a fifth grader, mom was a little bit horrified because she's like, wait, you're expected to make this portfolio, and she wanted the information to be very, very tedious. Like, I remember that at the time, internet access wasn't really something that we all had available. And in addition, books, it wasn't hard to get your hands on the proper book, but it could be challenging to have enough books for everyone to get their hands on it. So this portfolio is something that you had to be starting on it the moment that it was assigned. And what I remember of it was there was a section where you needed to plot bar graphs. On another section you needed to do linear graphs. In another section you needed to mention something about some specific animals, find out their scientific name, and break down by their species, their ecosystem, etc., and provide images, and also, define things. And if I remember right, you had to do a presentation on this portfolio. I really don't have a recollection of that, but I feel like we had to. I don't think it was just something that you could just turn in. But anyways, so with that said, she was being a pretty intense teacher when it came to her assignments. So to dive into what makes her terrible is that one day she called me out of the whole group because she was giving instructions on an assignment that she was given this homework, and I still remember this. It was a Friday, and then it was due on Monday. So I'm thinking, okay, Saturday and Sunday, I have to really work on this because she's pretty tedious about the expectations. So I was writing down notes next to the handout that had instructions on it. And then she was like, Zayam, what are you doing? And I'm like, um, you're expressing a lot of information that I don't want to forget. So I'm taking down notes on whatever you're saying. And then I forget the term that she said, but she said it was a term amongst teachers to express students who take notes like this. It was called something like um, writing down an eavesdrop, which is not an eavesdrop because you're saying it to the group, but it's like just side notes. Let's just call it side notes for the sake of simplicity. And then she was like, oh, because you are taking notes and writing down what I'm saying, as opposed to just listening and remembering, I'm going to stop talking so you guys figure out what it is that I want. My jaw just dropped. I was like, okay. So I don't remember what happened after that, but I remember the class just turning to me, looking at me, and nobody moved. We were all frozen. And then, of course, we looked back at her, and I don't remember what else happened after that. But but then I said, I am going to talk to my mom. So when the class was over, I went to my mom and I explained to her what happened. I said, Mom, this teacher penalized me for taking notes, which is a technique that you taught me and every single other teacher encourages, but they get frustrated that students don't do that enough. Like they expect to write down only the stuff that's on the board, and if you don't write anything that's on the board, they cannot take the initiative of writing it down or perhaps um, paying attention to where they can remember the stuff when they get home, you know? So so my mom was like, what happened again? She was like, that the teacher literally told me that because I was taking side notes, that she would no longer explain what else she expected from the assignment. And she was like, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. No, 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 no. So my mom, long story short, my mom the next day, or not the next day, but when they returned Monday, um, she pretty much had a reunion with this lady and a few other teachers. I also happened to have another classmate whose mother was also teaching at our school. And then we were pretty tight. So she had told her mom some stories of her own about how frustrating it is to be in that class and how difficult it is and how confusing the teacher is, etc. And then they all had this, like meeting, and then my mom pretty much roasted her and dragged her. And she was like, how can you say that? How can you expect for a student to do well when they are not practicing how to be responsible, which is by taking notes. Like, what kind of absurdity is that? One of the things that you really want to reinforce in students is retention techniques, and also prioritizing and having information ready to be able to properly address an assignment. I have never in my life heard of, and then I forget what my mom said that her argument was. I think it was something like, well, while she takes notes, she is not paying attention any longer. So by her not paying attention, it promotes other students to also not pay attention. In my mind, I was like, first of all, not everyone has their eyes on me when you're speaking. We are so scared of you that we don't dare to break the rules in your class. And second of all, I would sit on the back because I was usually the tallest girl in the class. And back then, my vision was good, so I didn't have to sit at the front. But, there was no way that someone was looking at me as the example to follow and like, oh, Zam is taking notes, so I'm totally going to space out because of her. No, this was her trying to argue on a lost cause. She probably realized how ridiculous she sounded when my mom was like, addressing her. So she was trying to somehow find a way to completely justify her deeds. So, anyways, and throughout the semester, she would never be satisfied with anything we did. I was a very passionate student. I studied hard all day, every day, and somehow I was never able to make an A on any of my tests. And I'm like, what? So, one time she penalized me for not using the exact sentence from a book to define a word. But my idea, my concept was correct. And what's frustrating about this is that on the preceding year, my fourth grade science teacher also did weird things like that. I'll never forget. She was saying, define the ground. And I was like, ground is the usually solid structure that supports um, foundations such as buildings and trees, and additionally, where we commonly stand. Something like that. But then the book definition was something like where materials like rocks and gravel or something are compacted enough to where sometimes it's firm to support structures, and humans and animals wandering, or they are unstable due to permeability of some elements like water. So I don't know, it's been such a long time. I don't remember the definition of ground except for what I wrote. But my mom was like, what is wrong about her definition? And then the teacher was like, well, it's because it's not what the book says. And she was like, she was expressing her understanding of the term. If she bottles up the definition of the word and then spits it out on the test, it doesn't mean that she is understanding what the concept is. She is learning to cram information into her brain, but she's not learning to do something with it. So that teacher also, my mom, she had her talk with her, and she became so much better afterward. Because my fourth grade teacher is who I'm talking about now. She used to be the kind of teacher who would give assignments solely from the book, the book, the book, the book, nothing outside of the book. And she would just sit at her desk, and by the end of class, you had to turn in your work. So she never lectured, she never explained anything. She would just rely on the book. So my fifth grade teacher, she was a little better about giving explanations, because I remember when we were studying cells, she was like, the mitochondria, da 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 da, the red blood cells, this and that. And it was complex, but at least she was prepared to attempt, I should say, to teach about it, because she understood the concept and she wasn't just shoving the book on her face and be like, you read that and study that and learn that and that's it. No, she was trying to engage us. But what made her a bad teacher is that as a student, you had to completely go by her rules. She didn't understand that there are different ways for a student to come up with the right or wrong answer. And as a teacher, that's why you have to sit down, read, grade papers, examine your students' performances, and then you determine the grade that you will give based on an assignment. You cannot expect to just memorize the same terms, the same lines, so that you can skim through it and grade it easily. No, you should allow for students to demonstrate that they understand something by filling in the blanks. But if you're just anticipating the answer, which is what the book says or what you wrote on the board for us to learn, that's it's not good. It's not good. So she was extremely frustrating and stressful, because her assignments for a fifth grader, they were incredibly complex. My own mother was like, if I were not an adult already with a degree, and that I also went through the process of all grade levels, of course, and graduated, there's no way that my mind would be able to digest all this, because you had to interpret some information to then create a graph. And my math level at the time, I don't have a recollection of having learned how to plot graphs before I got to that class. So for me, that was absolutely intimidating. Um, and then another thing was, we had to call a cousin of mine who happens to be a biologist, and he had books and resources, and he was like, yeah, the scientific name for this and that would be this and that, and the extra info that this teacher was expecting. And I was pretty privileged to have a mother who's a teacher, and then this particular cousin who happened to have resources handy to supply the information to me with. But there were some parents who decided to work on this portfolio like maybe the night before it was due, and they discovered that there's no way that they could get away with doing that. And I remember the friend who I mentioned, who was the daughter of another teacher. Actually, her mom and dad were teachers at the school. Well, her dad, when we saw him, his eyes were red, and they said that they stayed up until 3 or 4 a.m. working on the portfolio, and school starts at 8, and they themselves, no, I'm sorry, school for us started at 7, if I remember right. So they would get up at around 6, to get ready for 7 o'clock. So yeah, when that happened, that's when they understood the gravity of the situation. But at the same time, mom was like, well, projects, when you think of the word project, you anticipate that it's something big. You shouldn't just delay it until really, really, really late, because you never know what details you need. Maybe you need to drive somewhere to like a library to find information. Um, so yeah, it was crazy. I hope that I expressed why this teacher was terrible, because it almost sounds like I'm criticizing her for being strict and demand a lot from us. But what makes her a terrible teacher in my book is that she did not allow for students to be themselves and demonstrate their understanding of a concept with their own words. She was promoting that you just cram, in a sense, the information from the book, but she was not trying to put to the test your understanding of it. And the way you can test a student's understanding of something is by saying, okay, come up here and then tell the class how the cell works, for example, or maybe draw some kind of diagram to the best of your knowledge and maybe color code the different components of the cell, you know? Um, so yeah, I remember that semester just being extremely frustrating, extremely depressing, because I would go to that class and I'm like, oh my God, what is this lady going to come up with now? What what challenge is she going to throw in the way now that I'm not ready for? So yeah, it's been a long time, of course. Like my elementary school was how many years ago? I don't even remember, but it's probably 15, 16 years ago. So I don't remember a whole lot of it, but I do remember that semester being frustrated to the point that I think about it now and I'm like, thank Lord that that doesn't last forever and that not all of my teachers were like that and she was the only exception, because dang, like, you're a student and you're not allowed to take notes. I'm done. I'm done. So yeah, you guys, I hope you enjoyed my story. I know that I was kind of all over the place. I've been meaning to share this um, story for quite some time now, but I kept meditating on it and some stuff I just could not remember. So I said I might just roll with it because I just love telling stories of my past, especially school oriented ones, because you guys know that I wanted to be a teacher at some point. So this is just interesting to me to look back and reflect and being able to explain it for myself why I disagree with something, or in this case someone's method. So yeah, what was your worst experience in school? Who was your worst teacher and what made them be your worst teacher in your experience? Let me know, because I truly, truly enjoy to read stories from other people, because I'm like, wow, I'm sitting over here, crapping on my story, and it turns out that people have had it much worse than me. But I also want to see what kinds of teaching methods are perceived as negative for students, because honestly I've never researched that before, so I'm just really trying to draw my own conclusions here based on how I function and how I learn, which I know that my way of functioning and learning is not the same for everybody. So yeah, let me know. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you soon, and hopefully I can pause this without any trouble.